The Time Traveler, The Case of Sergei Ponomarenko. Chapter 1. The Man from the Past. On an otherwise typical spring afternoon in Kyiv in 2006, a man appeared in the middle of the bustling city, confused and out of place. His clothes were strange, a Soviet-era military uniform, pristine as though it had just been put on, but distinctly from another era. He looked around, bewildered by the cars, the buildings, and the people, none of which seemed familiar to him. The police soon arrived, drawn to the man's odd behavior. When they asked him for identification, he handed over a Soviet-era passport that had clearly been issued decades earlier. It bore his name, Sergei Ponomarenko, and his date of birth, 1932. Sergei's story, however, was even more puzzling than his ID. He claimed that the year was 1958. He explained that he had been out in the city, taking photographs with his vintage camera, when everything around him had suddenly changed. A moment, he was in Soviet Kyiv, old trolleybuses, people in 1950s attire. The next, he was surrounded by technology and people he didn't recognize. He was terrified, confused, and adamant that he had somehow jumped forward in time. At first, the police suspected some sort of mental illness or delusion, but Sergei was coherent, and there was something in the way he spoke. His detailed descriptions of 1950s Kyiv, his demeanor, that unsettled them. What was going on here? They decided to contact a psychologist to help make sense of Sergei's apparent confusion. But first, they had one piece of evidence that intrigued them: the old camera Sergei had with him, which contained undeveloped film. Chapter 2. The Photographs. Sergei's camera, an old Soviet model from the 1950s, seemed to be just another relic of the past. Hoping to find some clue about his true identity, the police developed the roll of film inside it. What they found was shocking. The photographs, all in black and white, appeared to be genuine images of Kyiv from the late 1950s. The streets, the people, and the buildings all matched the historical records of the time. Sergei himself appeared in one of the photos, standing in front of familiar landmarks, dressed exactly as he was when the police found him. There was nothing unusual about the photographs themselves, except for the impossible fact that they seemed to corroborate Sergei's story. These were not doctored images. They were authentic snapshots of a time long past. Yet Sergei stood in them, looking exactly as he did in 2006. The police, unsure what to make of this, contacted Dr. Marina Orlova, a local psychologist who specialized in cases of dissociative disorders and memory loss. Perhaps she could unravel the mystery of Sergei Ponomarenko. Chapter 3. A Man Out of Time. Dr. Orlova met Sergei at the psychiatric ward where the police had taken him. She had been briefed on his strange case, but nothing could quite prepare her for the calm, rational way in which Sergei described his experience. "Tell me what you remember," Marina asked gently during their first session. Sergei took a deep breath. "It was April 23rd, 1958, he began. "I was out with my camera, walking near St. Andrew's Church, trying to capture some good shots of the city. The air was warm, the streets were busy. Everything was normal. But as I was framing a shot, I felt something strange, like the world around me was bending. I took the picture, and then everything changed." He looked up at her with earnest eyes. "One second, I was in my Kyiv. The next, I was standing in a place I didn't recognize. Your Kyiv." Marina studied him carefully. There were no signs of delusion, no erratic behavior. Sergei seemed sincere, even if what he was saying was, by all accounts, impossible. "You understand that time travel isn't something that's scientifically accepted," she said cautiously. Sergei nodded, but there was a hint of desperation in his voice. "I know how it sounds, but I swear to you, I didn't dream this. I didn't wake up in 2006. I was transported here." Marina asked him more questions about his life in 1958, his family, his job, the political climate, all of which he answered with precise and accurate details that aligned with what she knew of the time. His knowledge of 1950s Soviet Kyiv was flawless, but still, there was no explanation for how he could have appeared in 2006. Chapter 4. Unsolved Mysteries. Dr. Orlova delved into archives, researching any possible connection that could explain Sergei's case. She wondered if there had been any historical records of a missing person named Sergei Ponomarenko from 1958. But despite her thorough search, she found nothing. It was as if Sergei had never existed in official records. She also checked the photographs again. There were no signs of manipulation, no obvious tampering. Sergei's camera and film were authentic relics from the 1950s, yet the film had been developed only in 2006. This paradox gnawed at her. Marina turned to other strange cases of apparent time slips, or people claiming to have traveled through time, but none seemed as well documented or as compelling as Sergei's. The mystery remained. During her conversations with Sergei, he seemed resigned to his fate. He asked repeatedly if there was a way for him to go back to his time, but Marina had no answers. The longer Sergei stayed in 2006, the more he seemed to fade, not physically, but emotionally. His connection to his past life became a source of sorrow, as he realized he might never return. Chapter 5. The Disappearance. Days passed, and Sergei's case garnered quiet interest from some in the scientific community, though most dismissed it as an elaborate hoax or a symptom of mental illness. Still, no one could fully explain how he had arrived with authentic 1950s artifacts, nor how his photographs matched a time long gone. Then, without warning, Sergei vanished. One morning, when Dr. Orlova arrived at the psychiatric ward for their scheduled session, she found his room empty. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of where he had gone. The staff were baffled. There were no records of him leaving, no sightings of him in the city. It was as if Sergei had simply disappeared, just as mysteriously as he had arrived. Despite a thorough search, Sergei Ponomarenko was never seen again. His strange case remained unsolved, leaving only questions in its wake. Chapter 6. A Puzzle Without a Solution. Dr. Marina Orlova couldn't let go of the mystery of Sergei Ponomarenko. His sudden appearance, the impossible photographs, and his ultimate disappearance all defied any rational explanation. Was Sergei truly a man out of time? Or had he been part of an elaborate, inexplicable event beyond modern understanding? For years, Marina continued to search for answers, but the trail had gone cold. Sergei's case was relegated to the realm of unsolved mysteries, a puzzle that science and logic couldn't explain. And so, the story of Sergei Ponomarenko remains a strange and unsettling enigma. A man who claimed to have slipped through time, leaving behind only whispers of a life lived in the past and a future he would never understand.